site.
There's a chance it's an English warship from the 17th century.
Go! Well, somewhere down there, Miranda, is a shipwreck, so if you can find it, we'll all be grateful.
This week we struggle against terrible visibility.
We've got a container ship coming, don't scuba for 10 minutes.
Dodge passing ships
It's not the sort of thing for the kiddies to do at home.
and go all out in a bid to identify this mystery wreck.
We await your results with bated breath.
Good, good.
This week, wreck detectives are in Waterford Harbour on the southeast coast of Ireland. Shipwrecks aren't exactly a novelty here. There are reckoned to be 400 lying on the seabed in these waters. But one ancient timber wreck found here recently has particularly excited archaeologists.
They think it could be the remains of the Great Lewis, an English warship sunk by cannon fire at a defining moment in Irish history. If they're right, it would be one of Ireland's oldest and most important shipwrecks. 350 years on, can we find out more about this dramatic incident and prove that our wreck is the Great Lewis?
Our dive boat is an old car ferry. This will be the base for our week-long investigation into what could prove to be a key wreck. With so many ships lost in this area, we'll need to unearth new clues to help narrow down the date of our wreck and even give us its identity. Our resolute wreck detectives diver, Miranda Krestovnikov, will be searching for clues underwater. And I'll be hunting through the archives for evidence to help us make a positive identification. The wreck came to light in 1999 when dredging in Waterford Harbour brought up some old oak timbers close to the spot where the Great Lewis is reputed to have sunk. But continuing dredging of this busy shipping route threatens to damage or bury the site, so there's an urgent reason to identify the wreck before vital clues are lost.
Just give us a running commentary as to what you're seeing down there, please.
We will be diving alongside Connie Kelleher, who is the archaeological director of this wreck.
Such a substantial, significant wreck site, it's practically intact underwater. To have that so close to shore in our waters is just a huge heritage value of its own accord, you know.
Connie works for the Irish government's Underwater Archaeology Unit, who are responsible for protecting and researching this wreck. They will also be making an urgent assessment to find out whether the dredging has damaged the site. Now, I don't know much about dredges, but according to Connie, it could have gone either way. I mean, it will have swept this channel along here. The wreck is supposedly right by it, and we have no idea whether it will have exposed it in a way which is really useful, or completely covered it up, or trashed it. We really don't know. So,
I know, and
that's kind of what
the only way
for.
we're going to find out is to dive it. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be absolutely fantastic. We could have a really nice wreck site down there.
Yeah,
or
we
we
could.
have covered it all up and there'd be not a lot to see.
The wreck site extends over a large area, at least 40 metres across. On previous dives, Connie and the archaeology unit have already found extensive timbers and 6 cannon lying in a row, mainly buried muzzle first in the mud. The site lies right on the edge of the navigation channel, dredged annually to allow safe passage for big ships. The wreck is only 8 metres deep, giving the divers lots of airtime underwater.
Stand in the door. You ready, Dave? Go! Cameraman in the water.
This first dive is for Connie to take me on a tour of the site and is also a chance to assess the effects of the recent dredging.
There's one with a double, one's a main air. That's
diving with scuba tanks, but Connie is using surface supply. For this, she has a heavy helmet that is totally sealed, and she breathes air pumped from the surface through these coloured hoses.
Are you last in?
I'm last in.
The water's very warm, by the way.
Connie's rig makes her less manoeuvrable, but it's safer for working on the seabed for long periods.
Dive in the water.
How's that? Make sure you jump a long way, Miranda. Okay.
I'll be watching the dive in our communications room and talking to Miranda underwater.
Making our way down from the surface, it's apparent the visibility is very poor. Connie hits the bottom first, but as none of the wreck is immediately visible, she has to use her compass for orientation. In visibility like this, it's going to be slow work finding anything.
For a moment, I actually saw the seabed there.
Yeah.
Incredibly.
Yes, so did I. If I kept my head really close, I could see. Oh dear, that's just absolutely beautiful. It's like a beach that nobody's stepped on.
Diving in a major tidal estuary makes visibility highly unpredictable. With no sign of the wreck, we're conducting a sweeping survey of the seabed, desperately hoping to come across any part of the wreck site.
Well, somewhere down there, Miranda, is a shipwreck, so if you can find it, we'll all be grateful.
Well, we are looking pretty hard.
Coming up.
Oh, hang on.
We have.
We found something.
We make a discovery under the mud.
Munitions are starting to run low. It's a desperate situation.
And we uncover more about the bloody battle that sank the Great Lewis. Investigating an ancient timber wreck that might be the Great Lewis, an English warship sunk by Irish soldiers in 1645. Miranda is diving the wreck site for the first time with Connie Kelleher, the site's archaeological director. They've been searching for the wreck for over half an hour in terrible visibility and have found nothing.
Yeah, I have a feeling that maybe it might be coming up frustrating.
And as an orientation dive, it looks like you can't see anything.
Hang on. We have.
We found something.
Timber. I can't believe I'm so excited. Look at this. I'm so excited there was one little bit here.
How big is that piece of timber?
Well, it's about
About a foot across.
Oh, just Connie's been digging around it now. You can see the blackness of the mud.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Nothing else here apart from this one bit.
At least we found a fragment of the wreck. We mark the timber as a future orientation point and return to surface. With so little of the wreck exposed, it's hard to gauge the effects of recent dredging on the site.
Right, Miranda, keep close to the ladder. Okay, well done.
Whoa. Not right down there. It was pretty bad. Actually, it's probably one of the worst dives I've done in wreck detectives. Worst visibility and absolutely nothing. If that's the seabed, I was like this. You can't see a thing, so you've got to, if you're looking for something on the seabed, your head's got to be that far away from it. Mad, absolutely mad.
2 months ago we were swimming along a line of cannons.
Really?
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that. I sort of wanted to close my eyes and picture all these cannon. I just couldn't see it at all.
It's phenomenal coverage.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that at all. I mean,
Really?
I was expecting, I think over the last couple of years post-dredging there's been a maximum of about 20 centimetres.
Right.
That
But you're
must be
talking
a
a
metre
metre and a half now. That's huge, isn't
It's
it?
huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
If the whole site is covered in over a metre of silt, it's going to be much harder to identify this wreck. And the layer of silt also affects Connie's post-dredging assessment. She can't yet tell whether or not the wreck has been damaged.
There it is, the navigation channel, the dredge channel,
Yeah.
is just 50 or so, 100 yards that away. So it's very close to where the wreck is.
I just think how scary it is that the wreck is just so close
I
to
know.
that navigation channel. I mean,
I
it's
know.
incredibly vulnerable. And those things are huge as well. I would hate to be in the water when one of those goes past.
We'll
Not
we'll keep that in
Yeah.
mind. But the weird irony is that if this hadn't been dredged, we might never have been aware of this wreck site. You know,
Yeah.
that's what exposed it in the first place, sort of 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's all kind of swings and roundabouts. In the 1640s, when the Great Lewis was plying these very waters, a particularly turbulent and bloody period of history was unfolding. The English Civil War, which had been raging for 3 years, gave Irish Catholics an opportunity to gain greater independence from England. Ireland was of crucial strategic importance for the parliamentarian cause. They were determined to prevent it becoming a hostile Catholic state, providing a backdoor to England for a French or Spanish invasion. The Catholics formed a confederation in the fight to drive the parliamentarians out of Ireland. In 1645, an Irish Catholic army commanded by General Thomas Preston had surrounded Duncannon fort, cutting off the parliamentarian garrison within. The fort was in a key location commanding the approaches to the major harbour at Waterford, and the parliamentarians were determined not to lose it. The Great Lewis was one of 4 ships sent from England to aid these desperate men. I've come to the fort to meet historian Jane Olmeyer, an expert on the wars in Ireland in the mid-17th century. She has a contemporary engraving of the siege that shows the Great Lewis's role in this violent struggle.
What we have with the siege in 1645 is the English parliamentarians trying to establish these footholds in Ireland, and of course the Irish Catholic Confederates desperate to drive them out.
And this is all the detail then of the besieging army.
Here we have the fort of Duncannon, and here we have Preston's camp, and you can see very clearly the guns being aimed at Duncannon fort.
What are these ships doing in the harbour here, and what's their role?
These ships play a very important role here because what they're doing is supplying this beleaguered garrison. There's 200 men in here. You must imagine what life was going to be like. You've got an army of 1,500 Catholic Confederates sitting out there firing shots at you, mortars, grenades. They don't have enough food. They're half starving. They don't have access to fresh water. Munitions are starting to run low. It's a really desperate situation from their perspective.
So this fleet represents their lifeline.
Very much so, and it's critically important that that fleet continues to supply the fort, and it's equally critically important from Preston's perspective to take these guys out.
Overnight, the Catholic General Preston moved the guns to a cliff top and at dawn fired on the English ships. The Great Lewis, their flagship, was so badly damaged by this surprise attack that she drifted out of control for about a mile and finally sank with all hands. If we can prove that the wreck out there that we've identified is the Great Lewis, what does that mean?
Oh, I think it would be enormously significant, very, very exciting. It's an English wreck that has been brought down by the Irish Confederates, and given that this was the only decade prior to 1922 that Ireland effectively enjoyed independence from England, it has that added additional sort of significance to it.
So the Great Lewis was on a crucial mission to get food and weapons to the beleaguered parliamentarian force, but was taken out by the Catholic force's skillful attack. Proving our wreck is the Great Lewis would provide a direct link to this critical moment in history and give Irish archaeologists a rare opportunity to analyse a Civil War ship. So finding our wreck is the Great Lewis would be highly significant. But can we find anything under the mud to help us prove it? We know from previous dives undertaken by the archaeology unit that there is a line of cannon on the site and large areas of structural timbers. In an attempt to expose more wreck, the unit is going to airlift around the single timber we saw on our first dive.
Okay.
They're using a giant hose to suck up mud from the seabed. And one of the unit's archaeologists will check if any artifacts are brought up. The airlifting has been a success in uncovering more of the timbers. At last we can start the underwater investigation. We're joined by dendrochronologist Nigel Nailing.
First thing, we'll go in and have hopefully a look at some of the timbers and see if they look like they're suitable for sampling. Once you start...
Nigel plans to use an underwater chainsaw to take a sample from the newly exposed timbers. The pattern of tree rings should give him a date range and get us closer to identifying the wreck. Connie will be overseeing the dive to make sure the method of taking samples will not impact the wreck.
Okay, pins locked in.
You're all right, are you? Fantastic. Have a good dive.
On this dive, I'll be in communication with Jeremy and Richard Enzer, an authority on 17th century ship design. He's hoping to give us some clues as to the size and date of the ship from looking at the timbers.
Okay, we're ready. Whenever you're ready, Miranda.
Followed their umbilicals down.
It's impossible to gauge underwater visibility from the surface, but as I make my way down to join Connie and Nigel, it looks even worse than before. I'm glad Nigel doesn't have his chainsaw out in these conditions.
Well, Richard, I would say from that the visibility is absolutely awful.
It looks like a London fog
It
in the
does,
old days, doesn't it? We can't see a thing.
Nigel, it's Miranda. Do you read me?
I read you Miranda loud, actually.
Are you seeing any timbers that you'd like to sample?
Well, I think we need to look at this one a little more closely and see whether we think, one, it is out, and two, it has enough tree rings for sampling.
Connie, are you happy for Nigel to take a sample of this timber with his chainsaw?
I would be happy with the sample being taken under other conditions, but the conditions just won't allow it unless it drastically changes.
Hello, Miranda.
Hello, Jeremy.
How's the visibility?
It's absolutely terrible. I mean, I'm looking, I've got my torch here, but you can just barely see the piece of timber here. I can't describe how bad it is down here.
Is that your best view of the timber?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, Richard, there you are.
Yeah, there we
if you
are.
want to have a look at that and identify
Yes.
it for us, that would be brilliant.
That would. It's definitely an old ship, but just how old, we've got no way of telling at this point in time.
So how can you be sure it's an old ship?
Well, by the fastenings, I think we could see there's some concretions from some old bolts.
Yeah.
And from the shape of the timbers, it certainly looks like a ship of the earlier era, probably 1800s, something like that.
Okay.
In the 1600s. You can't really tell anything more.
I mean, it's really pitch black, isn't
It's
it?
a shame.
It's night time
It
down
really
there.
is a shame.
Can you tell, by actually having a look at this, where this piece of timber would have come from? I mean,
Negative. It's an old ship's timber.
Right.
No further than that can we tell you. So basically, Miranda, if you're finished, I think you can return to surface.
yeah, we're doing that now. Okay. I think I'm clear.
Miranda! Slack. Oh, okay.
I mean, they're really mad conditions to dive in. I mean, we've got zero visibility, and Nigel wants to go in with a chainsaw, but I think that's been called off because it's just too dangerous. It's just too mad.
I can sort of understand that. Really.
Yeah.
What's the called off?
Great dive, mate.
I think I saw you down there briefly.
I know.
I'm incredibly impressed that they're able to work in these
Well,
sort
that's
of
what I
conditions.
keep saying to Connie, is if this is the conditions that you have to dive in every day, I don't know how they do it.
The good news is that Nigel's confident there's enough good quality timber exposed for him to take a sample.
And Nigel, you've got a fairly good look at the timber. Are you confident that it's oak and maybe of the right date? Can you tell?
It's oak. I can't tell in terms of date, but it's in, it's a sizable timber, which is something in its favour.
We think that's part of the outer part of the bow section of the ship.
So
It's very much integral to the whole area there. You've got these large deck, what appear to be outer deck planking running into that structural piece.
and where it's clearly part of the overall
and
structure.
it's much
and
more
hefty
substantial
chunk.
than what we saw today.
Yeah.
Much
yeah.
more.
It's been a mixed day. While there is still too little of the wreck exposed for Connie to assess the impact of recent dredging, it looks like the newly exposed timbers could give us a datable dendro sample. We'll just have to wait for the visibility to improve. The next day, diving is still on hold, but undaunted, we call in cannon expert Charles Trollope.
All right. Welcome aboard.
Oh, there you go.
Certain ships will not carry big guns, and
We can't show him any of the Site's 6 cannon in the flesh, but luckily Connie has footage filmed before the dredging.
But is there any possibility, because
It's a great chance to see what we've so far been missing, and will give Charles the opportunity to assess the age of the guns.
this is cannon number 1, just vertical out of the seabed, and
Yes.
just to come down upon it is an amazing sight. You can see by the exposure of this cannon how much coverage we have now on the site. It's at least 1.5 meters, because that was well uncovered, as you can see.
I'm so glad that you filmed this when you were down there, because it's a completely different site to the one we dived yesterday. So is this the second cannon?
This is
Yeah.
cannon number 2.
it's much smaller. That's quite a small gun, yes. I'm fascinated with what I'm seeing here. I mean, I'm seeing some of the best underwater shots of cannon I've seen. There is a problem, of course. They could be 18th century, but we shall know when we see the trunnions.
And you can see us coming on it there. This is the one cannon that has a trunnion exposed,
Yes,
but it's tapered.
that should be tapered, yes. Now that immediately tells me it is not an 18th century gun. That's an instant answer. They're almost certainly 17th century guns.
So Charles's 17th century date rules out many later wrecks in Waterford Harbour. But we still need to be more specific if we're to find out whether the wreck is the Great Lewis. Coming up, we get our hands on part of the ship's timber. And we send in the chainsaw. Welcome back. We're in Southern Ireland trying to solve the mystery of a timber wreck in Waterford Harbour. It could be the Great Lewis, an English warship sunk in a fierce battle in 1645. So far, we've only been able to see a fraction of the ship's timbers. The rest of the wreck has been covered in mud thrown up by recent dredging.
Proving our wreck is the Great Lewis would give us a direct link to a momentous period in Irish history, the powerful Catholic upsurge of the mid-17th century.
We know that in 1645, an Irish Catholic army besieged Duncannon fort, isolating the parliamentarian garrison within. 4 English ships were urgently dispatched to supply the fort. They moored up and delivered munitions and food to the besieged men. But the next morning, their flagship, the Great Lewis, came under heavy Irish fire. I've come to piece together her dramatic final hours with wreck archaeologist Connie and our weapons expert Charles Trollope. We're pretty much where the Great Lewis was anchored all those years ago. 600, 500 yards to the shore, which is where the batteries that were besieging the fort would have been arranged.
Yes, that's correct. They are there, they're up on that top bank over there.
Yeah.
And they are firing at the fort.
Now, what we know is that at some point, the land forces start to focus their batteries on the ships rather than on the fort.
This was an irritation to the attacking forces being fired at from the flank. They had a simple solution. That was to move a gun battery, which is marked on here, there, this one,
right.
Yes, which is on that cliff face up there.
Yeah.
And they did it overnight. They started firing at dawn, and they knew that they had 2 hours before the Great Lewis could move because of the tide.
Do we know exactly what the tide is doing on that day all those years ago,
Yeah,
Connie?
from having looked back at the old records, it appears to have been high tide, flooding high tide at the moment.
The tide on the flood is coming this way and she's trying to get that way. She's trying to get
out of range,
Yeah.
really. And she's just not able to move.
You've got 4 guns here, firing at the typical rate of the time, 15 rounds an hour. That's a lot of damage passing down the length of the ship. There is nothing they could do except sit it out for 2 hours, taking a hammering, and then cut the cables and drop away and hope for the best.
So she heads off down this way on the ebbing tide.
She may have gone so far and then she was grounded. And that's the end of it. She pounded on the bottom as the tide just started to lift her.
Now, is she in the right place? I mean, we know that the Great Lewis headed off this way, and we know there's a wreck out there where our dive boat is. Does it make sense that the Great Lewis would have ended up there?
It's highly probable, I suppose, in one sense, because I mean, if she drifted out there, like you said, she could have well grounded in that area. From an archaeological perspective, I'm always hesitant to be definitive unless we have definitive evidence.
So the Great Lewis, crippled by Irish guns, drifted down the harbour as the tide went out and sank in the same area as our wreck. But we still need positive evidence from the wreck site if we are to confirm it is in the right date range for the Great Lewis.
You ready, Dave? Yep. 240.
Conditions have finally improved enough for another dive. Dendrochronologist Nigel Nailing is back again with his underwater chainsaw.
There's absolutely no way I'm getting in the water with you and that chainsaw, though. Is it safe what you're doing? Tell me it is.
It's fine as long as I'm not crowded around with other people.
Right.
It's a safe piece of kit in the hands of someone trained in the use of a chainsaw, trained how to use all this other diving kit. But it's not the sort of thing for the kiddies to do at home. This is something that involves a lot of training, and I will need space around me.
Well, good luck, and then we'll see what we come up with later.
Fingers crossed.
Okay,